Today on Dram Talk, we're celebrating Burns Night.
Woo! And then we'll be discussing Isla. What's next?
What a night it is. What a night it is.
Happy Burns Night, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you're all celebrating with some good whiskey. We are.
So, Burns Night, right? It's a celebration of the life and poetry of Robert Burns.
Yeah, so for those of you who may be new to the whiskey community, you may have heard a lot of this cropping up over the past couple of days. Or you may be well versed and you know exactly who Robert Burns is and exactly what Burns Night is. But we figured we'd just give, I guess, a brief history on it, on the man himself, as well as what has led to this celebration of Burns Night some 220 years later.
Yeah. You might just be sitting there wondering, who's Robert Burns? Why does he have a night? Why am I listening to a whiskey podcast and he's coming up?
Yeah.
And what does he actually have to do with whiskey? So, Robert Burns, he was a poet and a lyricist. He was widely recognised as the national poet of Scotland, and he was born on January 25th, 1759.
Coincidence that today is January 25th? I think not.
And he died on the 21st of July, 1796. His works were hugely influential, inspiring the early founders of liberalism and socialism, and are still celebrated today. Auld Lang Syne is sung on Hogsmany, which is the last day of the year. It's a pretty common New Year's song, and he has become something of a national hero for Scotland, so he's a pretty big deal.
He is a big deal for them. I think he beat out William Wallace in the most influential Scottish figure for them. So, just as a side note to this, for anyone who is, I guess, into history, you may notice that the time he lived was considered the Scottish Enlightenment. So that was when Scotland had this massive outpour of really influential works in economics, philosophy, literature, as well as scientific and medical knowledge. So a lot of big names were living and writing and putting out works around this time, some of whom include the philosopher David Hume. He kind of reshuffled what philosophy was. He kind of grounded it in empiricism and evidence-based thought. So this idea that, you can't just think about life and think about the meaning of life. You actually need to ground that in experience. And then as well as Adam Smith, he was also writing around that time. So he published The Wealth of Nations, which is it's basically the foundation for modern economics. So they're two of the biggest names I know of who were working in Scotland around this time and whose works I have heard of. Unfortunately, if you do look into the Scottish Enlightenment, you're basically just going to read a list of a whole bunch of dudes who were writing around this time. So the contributions of women during this time were a little bit underplayed. Now, history's either relegated any notable females of this time to obscurity or just failed to create an environment where influential works can reach the same level of, I guess, awareness that...
Yeah, or just acclaim.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get back into the whiskey, because this is a whiskey podcast. Now, the first Burns supper on what is now known as Burns Night was held in memoriam by a few of Burns's close friends on his birthday, about 5 years after his death. So they had a big night of haggis, poetry, singing, and there was plenty of whiskey there. They had a lot of fun. They really enjoyed it. So they decided to make it an annual event. A year later, merchants in Greenock hosted the first Burns Club Supper. So the first officially recognized and hosted event. The idea was quickly adopted by other West Coast towns of Scotland who had a connection to the poet. So either places he had visited throughout his life or just people who knew of him. By 1806... Sorry, I should just clarify. The first night they had was in 1801, I believe. So that was 5 years after. So 5 years later, Burns Night had reached Oxford University. And 4 years after that, it had spread down to London. It ended up traveling overseas when some Scottish army officers celebrated the first Burns Supper in India in 1812. And then they also, around that time, there was like haggis and whiskey-fueled celebrations reported in Canada. The night soon became like a regular fixture in the calendar for like expat Scots throughout the empire. And some places may have struggled to find haggis, depending on where they are in the world. But, you know, whiskey was always a staple at these events. So it was just like a big event celebrated by a lot of Scots around the world.
Yeah, and I mean, the Burn Supper, as far as I know, it's a pretty flexible event. It's either informal or formal. It's hosted on the night or any night of the year. It includes a meal of haggis, celebrated by Burns in his address to haggis. It's served with mashed potatoes, tatties, and mashed swede, neeps. So tatties and neeps. The meal is accompanied by Scotch whiskey, of course. I mean, otherwise we probably wouldn't be celebrating it.
Yeah, exactly.
To be fair. And there's a lot of toasts and recitations of his poetry.
Yeah, so the combination of whiskey and haggis at these events, it's not really an accident. Like, haggis, for anyone who doesn't know,
It's good stuff.
It is good stuff. You know, when you hear about the ingredients, it can turn some people off.
Not me.
No. But it's basically like the heart, liver, and lungs of the sheep, minced with oatmeal, spices, and suet, and it's wrapped in a sausage casing, and then you simmer it for a few hours. Now, this guy Joe McSewan, he commented on Burns's relationship to haggis. He said, like, it's a poor man's feast made from humble ingredients that fills you up. It's not about airs and graces, which is a good symbolism for a man of the earth, referring to Burns, who rose to meteoric literary fame within his own lifetime. So, you know, whether or not it was Burns's actual favorite dish, as a kid who grew up on a farm who was quickly included into upper society in Edinburgh, he still had a little bit of his nose out of joint at the upper classes. So he would always embrace those kind of humble roots of his, like the, you know, the not fancy meals and the not fancy drinks. So he would usually spout his love of haggis, and as we'll get to shortly, whiskey.
Yeah, so whiskey is pretty much the perfect partner to haggis. Probably due to the fact that, I guess, the spicy notes, the fiery flavors, they kind of will just cut through the fat and the spice of the dish a lot better than any wine ever could.
Yeah, and wine being the preferred drink of the upper class.
Yeah, and Burns being who he was, he dismissed wine for its fancy ways in his epic ode to Scotch drink.
I mean, like, we can try and recite some of Burns's poetry, and I think it's fitting with the night. But you know, Brad, you got quite a good Scottish accent going.
You're really upselling this. It was horrible. we're trying a few times off recording, and I just came out German. I don't know what happened there. But,
yeah, I mean, like, Burns was writing in the late 1700s, so the old Scottish language was still pretty prevalent through a lot of his poems.
Yeah, but you know, either way, I'll give it a go.
Give it a go.
I'll give it a go. Let other poets raise a fracas about vines and wines and drunken brachus.
Yeah, so Burns, he wasn't a snob, and if any of you actually understood this, he was basically just saying, let the other people knock themselves out with the wine. I'm going to stick to my Scotch, my whiskey. It's the good stuff. So he dismissed wine basically because of its perceived prestige in the upper classes of society. He preferred the like appeal of like honest, homespun nature of whiskey, whose ingredients and origins were every bit as humble as haggis itself. So he saw these two as like the perfect partners. You know, this is a little bit obscured by the way that Scotch whiskey is currently like priced and promoted. But in his day, it was a very earthy spirit, and it was very rough and not something that was enjoyed by a lot of the elites at the time. Now, he died at age 37, so he was pretty young, and his total assets valued at about £200. Interestingly enough, Fred Macaulay, who was an accountant turned comedian, he estimated that like Burns the brand is worth £160 million a year. So
Yeah.
he left quite a legacy. And according to a report from the World Bank in 2003, global sales of whiskey jumped by 2% on Burns Night. So
Yeah, I can see that.
that's a lot more whiskey being bought on one night of the year. But yeah, so if you ever go to a formal Burns supper, usually formal meaning like it's hosted at a venue, there's usually a standard order for the evening. So it starts with piping in guests, which is basically where a bagpipe is playing as you walk into a venue. Once everyone arrives, the host gives a welcome speech. Then soup is served. It's usually like a Scotch broth. The haggis is then brought in. So this is kind of like what really kicks off the night. And the haggis is brought in led by, once again, a bagpiper. And then the host usually recites the address to haggis, and the haggis is then cut from end to end in line with the lyrics of the poem. So if you haven't been to one of these events or you're unfamiliar with this, would highly recommend looking up some videos on YouTube from it.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
It's pretty entertaining. Around this time, like a whiskey toast is made to the haggis, then everyone eats. There is sometimes a dessert, cheese and or coffee courses after dinner, which is, once again, followed by more whiskey. I feel like whiskey is the palate cleanser between each of the different courses and stages of the evening. The supper is like finished with some more toasts. So there is a toast to the immortal memory of Robert Burns, which is usually accompanied by one of his poems. Then there is a toast to the Lassies. So historically, this was done because the women were the ones that would usually prepare the meal for the evening. But it has since like changed over time, and as like the night progressed, like the whole celebration of Burns Night, as that progressed, as it gained more popularity and more participation from a lot of people, the toast kind of transformed into, and this is a quote from what I was read, it generally covers the male speaker's view on women and is normally amusing and not offensive. So it's aimed to be light-hearted ribbing, and this toast is usually then, or is always countered by a reply to the Lassies. So this is where the female speaker then responds with her views on men and gets to address any points brought up by the male speaker. So these toasts, they're usually humorous. They're usually composed together so that both people can, compose toasts that work well, that have, I guess, like fit within the theme of the evening and the...
Yeah, you don't want to get into anything too personal.
Yeah, no. But yeah, it's all in good-natured ribbing between the guests. After the toast, more songs by Burns are sung. Then the evening is closed where the host calls on a guest to give the vote of thanks, and everyone sings Auld Lang Syne. So, in a nutshell, I guess, that's the summary of Robert Burns, of the development of Burns Night and why it's celebrated around the world. I personally haven't been to an actual Burns supper hosted by an event, but, hey, any excuse to eat haggis and drink whiskey, I'm down.
Yeah. You just sign me up.
Yeah.
Just show me the dotted line and I'll sign my life away.
Okay, so tonight we are celebrating... We actually have had haggis tonight.
Yeah, we have. We've already eaten.
Yep, and we're celebrating with a dram of the Robert Burns single malt. So this is produced by the Arran distillery on the Isle of Arran, and it is like an official bottle it's the only official bottle endorsed by the World Robert Burns Federation. So yeah, they're the only people who are allowed to say, "Hey, this is a Robert Burns whiskey," and I think that came down to the fact that the Isle of Arran, the distillery, is the closest distillery in Scotland to his place of birth. Okay, so just looking at it, comes in at 43% ABV. At 43%, it's probably chill filtered. It's non-age statement.
Yep, but it is natural color.
But it is natural color, yeah. So they have that going for them. And a quote from the tin for what we should go in expecting is, "This edition of the Arran single malt is smooth, malty, and sweet with a delicious spicy twist on the finish." So I mean, like straight up on the nose. Like vanilla is a really dominant note. And I'm also getting like a little bit of a coastal element, a little bit of salt, a little bit of orange.
Yeah, for me, I'm definitely getting just really, really strong wafts of vanilla just constantly coming through. There is a saltiness there as well, but it's very light. So I'd say this is like a really, really light coastal. And I mean, we should have, can't remember if we said it or not, but this is the single malt. This bottle does come in a blended variety as well. I mean, what else on the nose as well? I'm almost getting some orchard fruits as well. More along apples.
I guess like in that sense, I'm getting, those white flesh fruits. So apples, pears, possibly even like a really, like fresh off the tree hard peach.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's not quite ripe enough to eat, but you got like that really crisp crunch.
So I think just onto the palate, hey?
Yeah, let's get onto the palate. Okay, like my experience with this. Oh, okay. Change a little bit then. Upon first taste, I was picking up the fruits. I think that's what came across initially. But then just like my entire mouth started to fill with that really like spicy twist, they called it. But it just kind of like emerged everywhere. So it was a mix of spice. I want to say possibly ginger or nutmeg. But even some of like the oaky, like that oaky bite you can get with a lot of like lower ABV whiskies. And then at the end, like the sweetness of the vanilla and even like a carameliness started to come through.
Yeah, this one for me, super, super rich.
Yeah.
Definitely fruity. Like you mentioned, it comes on pretty much at the front. Then it slowly just fades away. But what I'm left with is like vanilla, like really strong vanilla.
Yep.
It's almost like a dessert, like panna cotta, because you still have like that, like vanilla bean.
Yeah. And I think like to draw back to what the bottle was saying was there's like that maltiness. That maltiness creates like a very full mouthfeel. And so that just carries a lot of the flavors.
It's like almost on the finish as well. Like I wasn't sure if I was agreeing with like nutmeg, but I'm definitely getting like a cinnamon. Really interesting because any of that coastal presence that I felt on the nose isn't there at all.
It didn't translate to the palate. No, not at all. Yeah, it's very, I want to say it's very Speyside-esque and very like bourbon barrel Speyside. But I think like, I don't know what expectations I had going into this. I feel like I set my expectations a little bit low, a little bit to be prepared to be underwhelmed by it. But I almost want to say like the fullness of that malty characteristic has carried the whiskey.
It definitely has. And even that note that I was picking up saying along the lines of like a vanilla panna cotta, when it's coming along the finish, it's more like a apple strudel. I don't know. This is just bringing like all like strong dessert connotations for me.
Yeah, dessert connotation, but like not overwhelmingly sweet as well.
No.
Like it's a really good, I think that spice balances out the sweet notes really well. My only problem with like the apple strudel thing is like I want to say the fruity notes that come in at the start, they kind of get disappeared and laid on top of by the spices and then the vanilla.
Yeah.
But I really agree with your panna cotta note too.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat as you. Like I went into this one with pretty low expectations. Just I don't know. I didn't expect it to deliver.
Yeah, same.
In the same way that I guess a regular release single malt would from a distillery, right? I don't know why. I just had this idea that okay, you're branding something.
It feels more like a marketing ploy to sell whiskey as opposed to delivering a quality product.
Yeah. So I wasn't too sure. So I just went in with like a really low bar. And this is really, really delivering well above that.
Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, this dram, it's a very Moorish dram.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I want to say like almost, it's strange because like every time I go back to it, a different note comes across a little bit stronger every time. So it's like something else gets highlighted each time I go in. And like that time, I was getting a grassy, almost a hay note. And again, it's not a dominant one. Like still, if you're just going off what you experience the most, it's usually like the sweeter vanilla and a couple of the other spices. But then there's occasionally like something else just like bobs up to the top. And you're like, oh, okay, there's another note there.
Yeah, so for me, definitely this really rich, very complex, and just really smooth as well. Really easy to drink.
Mm-hmm.
And one that's just offering note after note upon each revisit. Because for me, this could be one that I introduce people to Scotch with. I think I could see it as something like that. Especially like if I consider its price point,
Yeah.
its ABV, and the sweetness of it. I think those three things there, they make
it accessible.
Yeah, it's almost like just a perfect trifecta of everything that you'd want in an accessible Scotch. So I mean, yeah, I don't want to keep gushing about it. So let's just add some water.
Add some water, see how that changes it. It's only doing a little bit just because it is sitting at 43%. I think like the first thing I note on the nose especially is the vanilla's dropped down a little bit.
Yeah, on the nose, the vanilla has dropped and it's really brought forward the oakiness in the dram. But on the palate, the vanilla is very, very prominent.
Yeah, I think the fruit is given away to the vanilla. I like that the spices stayed there. I think the spice is what's balancing the whole dram out.
Like the spice marries really well with the sweetness.
Yeah.
And it carries it along.
Yeah.
So it's not just, So it's not just like
the fruits and with the vanilla.
Yeah. So it's not just like a sweetness the whole way through.
Yeah.
You've got something underneath that and an extra bit of, I guess, kick.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just with that addition of water as well, the dram, it's maybe not as rich, but it's a lot lighter now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot lighter. It's a lot easier to drink, if that was even possible. But it is. And man, like I'm enjoying it with the addition of water.
Yeah, I'd agree that I think the water hasn't made it feel watered down. It's just lowered the fullness that we were getting initially. And it's made it, as you said, easier to drink. But both on the nose and the palate, I think the wood influence is coming across a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely it is. With that addition of water, the oakiness really almost jumps out of the glass now.
Yeah, and with it, a lot of woody spices. So cinnamon and cloves. I mean, like, not overwhelmingly identifiable as the spices, but that sense of, like, woody spice.
I mean, for me, this is a really, really deceptive dram. And it's one that is making me want to really actively go out and seek some more bottles from Arran.
Not bad at all.
Yeah. I mean, not bad at all. That, to me, that's doing this thing a disservice.
Yeah, I know. It really is.
That's doing this dram a disservice.
Yeah, I have been thoroughly and pleasantly surprised by this. I mean, like, I tracked this bottle down because for anyone in Australia who may now be intrigued by our ratings of this bottle, just be aware it is currently in clearance at, like, for example, Dan Murphy's. I don't know how easy it is to get. There is a particular Dan Murphy's store that still has a couple of bottles, but again, in their clearance section. So basically, once it's gone, and you may have to go online ordering to secure yourself a bottle.
Yeah, because I mean, even when we looked online, it didn't even show up in their system as it being in stock.
Yeah, so just be prepared to go to a bit of effort to find this one.
All right, Daniel, you got Jeremy words for this?
Do you? I may need a little bit more time to think about it.
Yeah, no, I got one.
Okay.
I mean, this is the dessert after you finish the haggis.
Okay.
It's got the sweetness and it's got the spice in just the right amount that's going to cut through what you just ate and make room for more whiskey.
Okay.
You know, so this for me is almost, it's like the perfect after haggis Scotch.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. So the sense I get from this one is I've got like an old barrel sitting outside in the fields, the field that we grow hay. And so you got like those big, massive bundles of hay rolled up along the fields. I'm sitting on the barrel. It's a nice, clear, sunny day, and I'm watching birds fly overhead. I don't know why that's the sensation I get from this one, but that's just the picture that's coming up in my mind.
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. I mean, might not be as good as mine. Mine was just a couple words.
Mine is poetic.
No, I mean,
allegorical, if that's the right word. I do not pay much attention in English.
All right. So ratings wise, do you have a rating or do you need me to go first?
I have a rating. as I think about it. Okay, I'm going to give this one a 6.9. Oh, nah. I question that now. As it came out of my mouth, I was like, nah, scratch that. I'm going to give it a 7.2.
Oh, damn. 7.2.
Now you've made me question that. Should I stick to my original one?
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not judging you. That's fine.
I'm giving it a 6.9.
I mean, I've already locked it in now. I've already erased 6.9 once. I'm not doing it twice. All right. So for me, I'm going to give this one a 7.
Okay.
I was just more surprised because I felt like I enjoyed that a lot more than you did. And then you just dropped to 7.2.
I don't know. I was just like thinking contextually with where we've rated other things. And I was like, then they don't directly correlate. But at the same time, I'm like, got to place it within the same category of ones that I've enjoyed just as much as this one. So in that line, I'm like, I put this in amongst that low 7s with other ones that I feel like if I had them both sitting on the shelf, it's a flip of the coin which one I'd get because I'd be equally happy with either of them. So that was my decision for moving it to that 7.2 range. Okay,
yeah. So, I mean, if you wanted the low 7s, you would have given it a 7 like I did. But this, I think it's for me anyway, this sits pretty well and pretty comfortably in that 7. It is
well above average.
Yeah, it is well above average. It's a great dram.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoyed it. And I don't know if that's just, I guess, the moment, it being Burns Night and all, that I'm just finding more enjoyment in the dram. But it's man, I've really enjoyed that. And I think what maybe might have played a part in that as well is just the idea that we lowered our expectations prior to drinking the bottle.
Yep.
Like having a dram out of the bottle. So did that play a part in it? I don't know. This one's definitely for me worth a revisit.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because of that, since now I know what I'd be expecting.
Yeah.
So
you'd have to wait till next year though. This bottle's only coming out on Birds Night.
So yeah, for me, this is definitely worth a revisit just to, if anything, get rid of that skewed idea that we went into this with.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree there.
And I don't know, maybe just after a course of haggis, tasted better. I don't know.
He may have been onto something with his pairing of the two.
Yeah, it could just be the magic of Burns Night.
Yeah.
But that's where it is for me. It's a 7.
Yep. Okay. Very nice. All right. I think we'll go on to, I call it our segment, but let's just say the next part of our pod.
Yeah. So let's get into it.
And we're back.
We're back. Right. So just lately, we've had quite a few emails come in from our listeners. We love you all. Just have to get that out of the way. Yeah. But, there's like a real common question among all the emails. Now, I don't know if you guys all pulled together and then sent a batch of emails all with the, I guess, recurring theme, but something really stood out to us. And Daniel and I being Pete heads, lovers of Isla, eat, pray, Isla, whatever you want to say. But, the common question was just, I'm in Isla, what next?
Yeah, so you usually have like maybe that single dram that got you into Isla. And you're like, oh, this is good stuff. This is what I want. This is where I want to be. And then you try one other and you're like, it's okay. And then you try another one. You're like, that's not bad. Yeah, that's also pretty good. But it's like, as we've mentioned, you always want to chase that first PT hit you got when you tried your first Isla whiskey. And I'm like, we have mentioned it and we came up in a couple of emails, but like when you revisit that first bottle you get, it doesn't have the same influence. And you're like, well, how do I get that? How do I catch that again? Or not just even how do I catch it again, but like, what next? Like, what do I do now when I feel like I've hit, I want to say a pinnacle, but I don't want to just plateau from here. How do I keep going up?
Yeah, it's a really common thing that Pete lovers face. It's just that, like, I don't know what it is, if it's palate fatigue, but even that, I don't even think it's that. It's more just that you've experienced that now and then you're never going to have that same shock to the senses that you did in that initial experience.
As much as you can prepare someone to give them their first Isla whiskey, like this is going to be smoky, it's all you're going to tell. Like I still feel like you can't build it up enough. Whatever you try and verbalize to them, their experience is just going to be something different that, you know, can go one of two ways. For most of us, it's gone a very good way. But then it's can be like, well, how do I get that again? What more? Like, what will offer me that same kind of experience that made me fall in love with this area in the first place?
Yeah, and I think I find as well that, I guess, people that slowly find themselves ingrained in Isla, and then you kind of get into this, like, you're almost like a Isla junkie. You're just kind of going on. You're like, where can I scratch that itch? Where can I scratch that itch? Where can I find that again?
One more hit of peat.
Yeah, it almost becomes like a diminishing return because the more and more you dig into Isla, the more your palate becomes accustomed to peat. And then, as I've mentioned before on the pod, that note of peat, it's going to become just a note. It's no longer going to be the defining characteristic of that dram.
Yeah, and in saying that, there are some, I would argue, some spectacular drams out there that regardless of where you started, if you turn to these, they're going to give you quite a satisfying, really good hit of peat. Like, I even find when I spend some time away from peated whiskies, going into like some of the sherry casks or trying some of the membership bottles we get, it's like when you return to that, when you smell a really good peated whiskey, it's almost a spiritual experience.
Yeah, it's almost like whenever you just smell peat after it's been a while, it's like, that's the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It like I don't know what it is about Isla, why we love it so much, but that's just where we are and where we're at. And I think, like as Daniel mentioned, taking a step away from Isla for a little while can be like a really good way to just hit the reset button a little bit. Good, because like we mentioned just before, you're never going to recapture that initial moment.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to accept that. It's
deal with it.
You know, as I wipe a tear from my eye, you're never gonna accept that. But even then, when it comes to peated whiskey in general, peat will become like a note, just like you're experiencing coastal or sweet or savory. Like it becomes a note, and then I find that you get even more enjoyment, or well, I've been getting a lot more enjoyment in comparing the way different Isla distilleries utilize peat and to the varying degrees at which they peat the barley and seeing how that affects the dram itself. So I'm finding a lot of enjoyment in that now that my palate is so accustomed to peat. Like, I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't, I guess, leave a bad taste or anything. It's something that I want to actively seek out and see how these other distilleries in Isla are utilizing peat.
Yeah, and I guess like everyone's experiences are going to be a little bit different. But, you know, as you're saying, when it comes to peated whiskies, all peated whiskies aren't equal. They aren't all the same kind of peat you're going to experience. So you can have some whiskies that are going to be that like really dry wood fire peat. You can have some that are going to be more medicinal. You can have some that are going to be more savory and meaty. You can have some that are like damp and vegetal or like salty and coastal. So there are a lot of different ways that peat can express itself, and they can give you different levels of satisfaction depending on what kind of peat you actually love. So that's why you can usually find people get stuck into one particular distillery or a couple of them, or you can have some people who love, say, for example, a Lagervullen, but really aren't a huge fan of a Laphroaig. So, you know, there are like peat's quite unique depending on how it's utilized in the different distilleries, and, you know, expanding your horizons when it comes to the different distilleries in Isla can show you what you like and also what you don't like, and it can also, you know, lead you to discovering new things.
Yeah, no, I mean, we mentioned before earlier, taking a step away from Isla, giving yourself a little break, experiencing something new. So, you know, Daniel, where do you go from there?
So, I guess, like, first of all, if you're going to be stepping away, you have to want to step away, because, you know, if you're really after a peated whiskey and you think maybe I should get away, but you really don't want to, any whiskey you approach, it may feel like it's missing something because you're really just after that peat. So nothing is going to actually be satisfying and you may not actually enjoy it. And I think case in point is the first time I tried the Glenallachie, I was like, when that came to me as part of the whiskey club, I want to say I was even maybe considering not getting that month's one because I just wanted to have my money to buy peated whiskies. And it arrived and I was like, it's from the Space side. I really just want peat. And then I tried it. I was like, it's all right. And I like, for any listeners of the pod, you may now know that the Glenallachie is probably one of my favorite Speyside distilleries. So I quickly changed my tune, and a little bit of that was just wanting to explore more in the world of whiskey and actually being willing and open to trying different things. So, but as it comes for like recommendations of how to get out of Isla, two things I would recommend is one would probably be try a peated whiskey from a different distillery. And that's a good way of both trying different variations of peat as well as picking up common notes and characteristics of distilleries in other regions. And the other alternative, I guess, on there would be trying different countries. So I know if you can afford it, Japanese whiskey is really good and they do some really good peated whiskey too.
And I mean, for me anyway, if you wanted to even step away from Isla, but not necessarily peat. So I'd suggest taking a look at the Jag.
Yep.
It's, I guess you're going to get to the same degree of quality and the same degree of care of peat and the way they utilize it in their dram. So the Lejag 10, really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it gives any Isla whiskey a good run for its money. You know, so definitely seek that one out if you want to try and see how other regions utilize peat. And even if you want to see how a real good Speyside whiskey mixes with peat, the Cragganmore 12 peated, that's just a truly exceptional dram.
Yes, it really is. It is part of Diageo's 2019 Rare by Nature special releases. So you may have to be quick to secure yourself a bottle of that one. And I mean, like, I guess, okay, so the other thing I probably would recommend is, I mean, if you're open to it, like branching outside of your favorite distillery and trying a couple of other distilleries in Isla, because like, yeah, sure, you may find some you don't like, but you'll also find some you actually love, because I cannot sing the praises of Kilchoman highly enough. Like, I have tried two of theirs, the Makibe and the Seneg, and man, that Seneg, that was next level. Like, it's that kind of, they're the kind of bottles, like you open it and the smell of peat is almost satisfying enough that I'm like, I could just smell this all day. I don't even need to go into the palate. Like, this is just so satisfying.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to look at, say, a bottle or a scotch that's not peated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something different. And you want to pretty much break away from the Isla chains that bind you, right? I could suggest having a look at sherry whiskey, like sherried whiskey, scotch aged in sherry casks. Super good stuff. I mean, we are on a pretty big sherry kick at the moment. It's been, I don't even know if we can call it a sherry kick at this point. It's been that long.
Yeah.
And like, oh man, I can't sing the praises of Abelau enough. They're very quickly becoming one of my favorite distilleries. And same as the Glenallachie. So, man, the stuff they do with those sherry casks is just blows my mind.
Yeah, those two stand out as a pinnacle for me with sherried whiskies, both in all of Scotland, I would say.
Yeah, and what I've found as well is that sherried whiskey has that almost same fullness that like a peated dram would have, where it's got so much to unpack. And what I've found a lot of the times as well is when I'm adding water to a sherried whiskey, it opens up into even more flavors and even into more complexity, just like a peated dram would.
Yeah, and on that line, I would say, like, yeah, as you were saying, like the amount of fullness in the dram, the amount of flavor, I don't know, just the quality of it. it doesn't leave me wanting for peat.
Yeah, it doesn't leave you sitting there thinking, what if this was peated?
Yeah. Like
So then,
there's no room for there to be anything more on top of this.
yeah. And I guess my other suggestion would be going to the source, jumping into bourbon. I can't recommend Elijah Craig highly enough, right? I don't know. I just love Elijah Craig. And the spiciness that's in that, it just almost just gives you that same feeling as if you're drinking a peated dram. It's got great smokiness as well. And then you almost just give your palate a real attunement for like oak cask maturation.
Yeah.
Because you're really getting those flavors almost at their like purest.
Yeah. And so by going to the source, you meant like, because the majority of Scotch whiskies, whether they're in Speyside or Isla, are usually aged, if not for all of their life, part of their life, in a bourbon cask. So a lot of the flavors that make up the actual palate of whiskey comes from bourbon itself.
Yeah. So, yeah, even then, like, what else would I recommend? I don't even know. Do you have anything else you'd recommend?
It can be hard because, I know what it's like to be in that point where you're after the peated whiskey and it feels like nothing else will do. You just need that first hit of peat. And, that's just my thing. It's like, if that's what you're after, experiment with different peated whiskeys because they're going to give you what you're after. And as again, just probably repeating myself, but you may find ones you don't like as much. You may find ones you like just as much. So just experimenting with different things, but also taking a break and then coming back to it. They're the two options I would give for people who love peated whiskey and are struggling to find that, or they're still trying to chase that peated smoky hit that they got when they first got into it. They're just the two recommendations I would have for somehow getting something akin to that back.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there. And I guess really to sum it all up, you guys might be thinking, this is Burns night. How did this turn into Isla talk, Isla chat? Well,
it's Dram Talk. We'll find a way to make it about Isla.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, Robert Burns, he loved haggis, loved Scotch. So, I mean, we love Scotch, we love haggis, we love Isla.
We're just embracing everything we love about Scotland and whiskey. Yeah, so I think that about wraps it up for this evening. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you have been celebrating Burns Night as well, we'd love to know how you celebrated. If you've got any photos, feel free to send that to us via our email or Instagram. We'd be happy to share some of them. Just spread the love of whiskey and of Robert Burns.
Right, yeah. So all our info's in the link tree below. Yep. And I mean, hey, it's been a great Burns night. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Been good.
Lunge.
Pour another dram!